Greetings. It's time to take stock to different approaches to discipline inquiry that we've studied over the course of the semester. Just to get us started, we want to refer back to John Dewey in a quote from 1916, in which he says, "Only by wrestling with the conditions of the problem at first hand, seeking and finding our own way out, do we think." It seems like Dewey really sums up the inquiry process in terms of wrestling with problems and seeking and finding ways out. Importantly, it's this experience that Dewey thinks that we've come to know. I feel like over the course of our readings, we've looked at a continuum of inquiry between very highly structured inquiries and more open-ended. If you think about the readings that we've covered over the semester, we've gone back and forth between the sort of means and discussion. That inquiry is a means and an ends of itself in terms of ambitious teaching in the social studies. I'm going to draw particular attention to a quote from Say's chapter on page 388, in which he points to the purpose of social studies as social education for citizenship with rigorous and often interdisciplinary inquiry, serving as a means for civic decision-making. He refers back to the past for the new social studies projects of the 1960s, in which the period conceptualized disciplinary inquiry as a valued end in itself, with the assumption that developing disciplinary understandings would implicitly cultivate informed citizens. So here you see throughout a history of our field, inquiry has been attached to and connected with civic decision. You also find in this series of readings the difference between the novice students that we have and the experts in the field of history or social sciences that make up the social studies. It's incumbent on us as teachers to help move novices towards more expert knowledge base. This means we have to design supportive learning inquiry environments in which students are scaffolded. The notion of scaffolding is that by engaging learners and attending to their role of social mediation as well as their developmental stage, we provide them with scaffolds which we can eventually remove, and these behaviors and skills will become more automatic. Questions driving us then as teachers are, what do we mean by ambitious teaching? How do we achieve rigor and depth? And what happens when students engage in authentic intellectual work in the classroom? All of these are important conditions for us to consider as we plan our lessons. The readings we did on authentic intellectual work divides this work into three pieces: deep content knowledge, discipline inquiry, and relevance beyond school. Again, we can put this on the continuum of inquiry, somewhere in the middle between structured and open, to think about guided or disciplined inquiry. Examples of guided inquiry and disciplined inquiry that we read include Miller's chapter on project-based learning, Say's overview of disciplined inquiry, Parker and Hess's focus on discussion, and Hicks et al.'s Skimsey strategy. So if we go back to our continuum, we might place some of the things that we've been studying, whether it's project-based learning or structured academic controversy, and more recently the C3 framework, in this, again, sort of the middle of this continuum of structured and open inquiry in our field. So open-ended inquiry, of course, is where the students are left to their own devices, whereas structured is very tightly organized. So we might put our structured academic controversy more on the structured end of the continuum, whereas we might put some problem-based learning more on the open end. Again, returning to Say's chapter, it's important to think about what how he defines characteristics of disciplinary inquiry. The first position, drawing from the social science tradition and looking to expertise as those practiced in the academic disciplines for the learning target, might be characterized as disciplinary inquiry. So in other words, here the focus is back on the academic disciplines. The second position might be called disciplined civic inquiry, where proponents of this position ask what expert citizens do. So you begin to see there's some a little bit of a tension within the literature between those who focus on the disciplines that make up the social studies or those that focus on citizenship education or democratic citizen education as an outcome of the social studies. The C3 inquiry arc was intended to achieve both of those things, to merge disciplinary inquiry with more civic engagement. We have 4 dimensions of the inquiry arc. The first dimension focuses on developing questions and planning inquiries. The second is applying disciplinary tools. The third dimension includes evaluating sources and using evidence. And then finally, dimension 4 focuses on communicating conclusions and taking informed action. So we have the disciplinary focus as well as the focus on civic engagement and thinking about relevance beyond the classroom. Importantly, as we do presentations around the state and within the district, we highlight that inquiry is not new and the C3 framework didn't invent it. Instead, we draw on existing practices within the research, and the framers of the C3 framework look to this research to emphasize the disciplines. So I think it's really helpful to think about the C3 framework not as a new approach to teaching, but as a organizational structure or an instructional pathway or lesson planning tool that can help you engage in disciplinary inquiry in your own classroom. And that's because it focuses very carefully on the 3 components of the inquiry design model, which include questions, tasks, and sources. So, for example, an IDM blueprint or an inquiry blueprint would include all of these things on it in a quick glance. So you see at the top the focus on the content standards, then and the big compelling question, in this case, can words lead to war? And then beneath them, they have these 4 supporting questions. The idea here is to develop some vertical alignment where the supporting questions inform students' ability to eventually answer that overarching compelling question. You notice at the bottom, students are actually asked to construct an argument to respond to that compelling question. We know students won't be successful in answering this question unless they've had an opportunity to go through some carefully structured learning activities that include understanding and reading various sources, as well as engaging in formative performance tasks. It's through these performance tasks that you as the teacher are able to monitor your student understanding. So again, the 3 big parts of the IDM inquiry design model and on this blueprint are the questions, the tasks, and the sources. I invite you to explore what's available for you already on c3teachers.org. When you go to that site, you'll see published inquiries that go beyond just the blueprint to have a cover page that sets the stage for the inquiry, as well as overviews of the inquiries, the supporting questions, and excerpts of the important sources that are included. This is a great place to get started. If you're interested in integrating C3 into your own classroom, you should go to the site and look for a topic that may connect with your own classroom. This isn't teacher-proofed. You're going to have to make some of your own adaptations, of course, in order to make it appropriate for your classroom. But throughout this, I just want to encourage you to keep in mind that we are engaged as teachers in a design process. Particularly the C3 focuses on design, the inquiry design model. However, but all of these approaches that we've covered in class, whether it's structured academic controversy or problem-based learning, all focus on teachers as curriculum gatekeepers and instructional designers. So finally, the design path for IDM, as you can see, has 3 phases and is fairly sophisticated in terms of the stages that you are to go through. However, again, just kind of thinking of the scaffolding there, what it does is scaffold the planning of an inquiry for teachers to integrate into the classroom. So the next step for you in this course will be to integrate inquiry into your own practice. looking ahead, I'll be asking you to identify a lesson or activity in which you can integrate inquiry. And then over the second half of the course, you'll be reporting on your planning, implementation, and ultimately reflection of how that teaching goes. Well, there's more information for you in our Moodle page and in the course syllabus, and I'm happy to answer additional questions.